It is intended to be kind of like more like career orientated, so the subject matter will go very deep and theoretical sometimes. Feel free to ask me your questions at the end, keep notes of them if you want, and let's explore it a little bit. So first, let's start with what's Rival Stars horse racing. I think most of the people in the room know what it is, which is good, but just for those who don't, here we go. Oh, that's a good point. Thanks, Andrew. Oops.
Stability.
Yeah, that's why I have a tech manager in the room. All right, great. Let's try that again. I think I might have to go back and forward.
Racing for free on smartphone or tablet. Play now.
All right, I expect all of you to be doing that now. Just get your phone out, quickly download it. Anyway, really great game. We built this a while ago. It's one of PickPock's, I think, really big achievements, other than Into the Dead, which was a really, really big achievement for us as well. Got significant numbers of downloads, still does. As an ongoing big part of our business, it supplements a lot of our development, and it is a core part of what keeps PickPock being able to do what PickPock wants to do. So this game it would be an understatement to say that this game is important to the studio. It is really, really important to the studio. And as you saw, the core of it is about putting horses in the front, and they are the heroes. That's why people come to play this game. It needs to feel realistic. It needs to feel responsive. It needs to feel satisfying to play. And maintaining that and keeping it relevant against all of the competitors who, after we've shown that horse racing is a thing people want more of, have jumped into the market, we need to continue to develop this. We need to keep expanding it. We need to keep adding more features and more things that people can do with their horses. Because we have discovered that it's about the horse lifestyle. It's not just about like the horse racing. And that means more things. And more things means more complex code, means more complex live operations, means a large team trying to essentially fight back against complexity continuously. What else was really working well here? So besides being financial success, well, the people on the team were some of the smartest people I've worked with. They were really good at what they did, and they were passionate about this game. They were bringing everything they had every day to try and make this the best it could be for our players every time we release something. So this is me. I've done some things. I started off as actually an artist. Then I went quickly into game design, because it turns out I'm not particularly good at art. I write books. I've done game design for quite a bit. I've taught myself some programming and built some games on my own, as well as for companies. And I'm also really passionate about teams, leadership, and process. So I ended up in product, and then product and process later. which led me to create like essentially a leadership kind of like framework that I believe empowers me to be able to do my job better, or at least help other people figure out how to do their job better as well. So what was I actually trying to address? Well, there was a string of live issues that were kind of like popping up in the game. We're getting more over time, and I was asked to come help the team figure out how we could reduce this. How could we actually bring more stability to the product in terms of the experience people were getting at the end of the day. Like I said, people working on this were all really smart, really capable, passionate people, focused on wanting to deliver a great experience. So I wasn't coming to fix the people. I was coming to try and figure out what was it in the way that we were doing things that ended up creating this complexity that then spiraled into live issues. When I say a live issue, it means that we are just releasing a update, whether that's client, server, or payloads, and I'll explain some of these terms later. The audience receives the update, whatever it is that we've just introduced, and something about it breaks in such a way that it negatively affects their experience, and especially if they're unable to play the game or spend money in the game, which makes us less capable of continuing to support the game. Because if people get upset, they leave the game. If people leave the game, we make less money. We have less money to pay our people can no longer make cool updates, right? So there's a vicious cycle there we can't allow it to happen. We need to keep the stability of both the team and the updates and the goodwill of the audience as high as we can. So this was the core idea. So first off, I want to talk about this idea. Often people have this almost one-dimensional perspective on what is the big problem here. There's no such thing. There's never just one big problem. If you say, yeah, there's one big problem in my studio or in my game, you're committing all kinds of fallacies right there. One of the big ones is a false dichotomy, where you think it's either this or that. It's never this or that. There's always a spectrum of things. There's always a network of effects that's actually at play. So what we're actually looking at is like, what are the symptoms that we were seeing? What were we trying to address? So before we started making changes, the 2 updates prior, we had 11 live issues, which is high. It's quite a number of like things that were going wrong in the live environment we had to jump in and sort out. What was the fall-on effect of this? Well, people are stressed because every time they're doing an update, they're like, oh no, what's going to go wrong? Community support is stressed because they're going to have to deal with the fallout of this. And when people are like jumping off the work that they're currently doing to go fix something that's wrong in the live environment, that means they make mistakes on the things they're currently doing, which then creates a live issue in the next one, right? So it's kind of like a self-perpetuating loop if you don't do something about it. We also had multiple leaders burn out, where they were, this is over a period of time. We don't do overtime in our studio. We haven't for many, many years. But people were actually burning out. There was serious tension between people and some interpersonal conflicts that led to people just having a really bad time at work. And like I said, good people, passionate. It's not a problem with the people. The problem here is how things are fitting together that's creating this tension, that's cooking the pot in such a way that people start to feel burnt out and feel like they're under way more pressure than they should be. Well, don't get me wrong, this is an important title. There should be some pressure. We don't want the pressureless environment, but we shouldn't have pressure that we feel helpless to do anything about. So let's talk a bit about complexity. And this is why I've been talking about the problem is multifaceted, the issue that we're dealing with is multifaceted, and we can't just say, well, person X, you're the one to blame. And there's multiple reasons you shouldn't do that. For one is, it's very unlikely that one person is to blame for what's going on. It's very rarely actually someone making a mistake without the system actually creating the environment that cooks that mistake in the first place. It's much more likely that something about how we're doing something is leading to mistakes being made, rather than that the person was negligent or not paying attention or something else. Even if they were, that might be because they're tired, because they're overstressed, because they don't have enough focus to be able to do their job as well as you want them to. So we needed to unpack what was really going on here in order to be able to address the core issue. And this is basically where we're going to take a little bit of a deep dive into some theoretical models that may make your eyes glaze over. Hopefully, some of them will be interesting enough to keep your attention, and I will endeavor to rather inspire you to go read more about them rather than fully unpacking them here, which will take me weeks. But I want you to understand the thoughts that were going on in my head as I was approaching this challenge and how I was thinking about trying to address it. Because the way that I approached it is more important than the specific things I did to change the system. I can't tell you, well, this is what I did. You go back to your team and you apply it and it'll work. It's very unlikely that will work. Why? Because complexity, right? Like your team works different. You have different people. You have different mechanics at work that are creating the situation you find yourself in. So I can't just give you good advice and you go and you apply it. What I can do for you is to show you how I think about the problems, and you can use that to apply to your own environment to try and figure out how to solve your specific issues. So here's a diagram of what the team network of communication looked like at the time I stepped in. So each line is a line between one person and another who need to talk to each other in order to get their job done. Now, this that we see here is quite a lot of information to keep on top of. Let's say you're in charge of making sure something happens in this game. You have an idea you want the team to execute on, but each one of these lines mutates that idea slightly. So by the time it actually gets done, many people have augmented it slightly from what you intended, and what ends up on the other end isn't really in your control to be able to constrain if you need to. Now, this is a lot of complexity to deal with in terms of like how many conversations are how many conversations are going to be occurring and how they're going to interact with each other to come up with better ideas. And that's a good thing sometimes. Like you want some complexity to spawn new ideas, cool creative solutions to problems. But when you're trying to be more efficient, and this is something we'll talk about later, this can be quite detrimental because you have a governing constraint system that you're trying to apply, or maybe even a specific directive of how you need something to be done. But because of how everything interconnects with each other, that gets changed over the course of interactions between people to the point where you have very little control to actually make sure things get done the way you want them to be done. Not to mention that if this person has a problem with something that that person did, and that person goes to that person to talk about it, and this person goes to that person to talk about it, suddenly instead of two people on team figuring out how to get along, you have a whole network of people arguing behind each other's back about how to resolve a problem, which is quite problematic and natural as well. Human beings, many are adverse to conflict and would rather go talk to a safe confidant rather than confront the person they have an issue with. And whilst we'd hope that's a healthy triangle where the confidant then goes, hey, let me come with you and let's go talk to that person, which is a very good way of dealing with it. Many people will instead hide that conflict and refuse to talk about it and just complain behind the scenes about what's going on. And that then creates animosity and other effects within the system that's really hard to account for as well. On top of that, this is our branching. This was the branches, this straight screenshot from my fork in 2025, 10th of January, so beginning of the year. That's a lot of streams of work to be on top of. What was this doing? Well, there's a fellow in the audience here who was responsible for ensuring that that all comes together before we do a release. He spent several hours each release trying to make sure that all the merge conflicts were handled. And on top of that, many of these branches were just straight up dead. Like we hadn't actually done anything on them in a long time, and some of them were forgotten, right? It's wasted work that's just kind of sitting there and not useful. We also, I promised I would explain these terms to you. Let's talk about it. So the team was caught between three major kind of like points of contact with the audience. Server, which is the thing that feeds data and mechanics to our client. It is the most direct kind of path to the players. You can very easily mess something up there that will seriously negatively impact the economy of the game. So it is something that you have to be very on top of, very careful about how you deal with it. It manages all of the logic in terms of like how the economy functions. Then the client. This is your Unity or Unreal kind of like thing. For us, it's Unity. The thing that actually ships to the players through the App Store. This also has a lot of complexity. This holds all of our game mechanics in terms of like the actual racing, the actual like kind of interface between the players and the game. And the payloads. And the payloads are basically data packages that we send, which changes the balancing of the game, events, or whatever we want. So that's kind of like the least mechanical part. Like you haven't got like actual kind of gameplay changes that come from that. What you get is tweaks in the gameplay. Very important thing to be able to deliver to your players on a regular basis, because every time we want to do a live event, some cool new thing is happening in the real world. We want people to be able to enjoy it. We put some numbers in a spreadsheet. That spreadsheet gets built into payloads. Those payloads get injected into the game. And voila, you have a whole new game mode, it looks like. But actually, it's reusing assets and things we already have, but in a fun, interesting new way that makes it worth you tuning in this week and playing the game. All right, so we all had all these entangled to go out at the same time, and which means that checking all of them, testing all of them, was quite a big job. If something is wrong in one of them, you have to disentangle which one it belongs to and how is it actually kind of like interacting with each other to create the problem that you're seeing, and then fix that. And we also ended up having to do full testing for something like the server on all of our devices that we support, even though the server, if it breaks on Android, would probably break on iOS as well. And the client, however, we need to make sure that it works on every single device you can think of that someone might play on it, because you could have some random GPU that doesn't support a certain aspect of Unity in a most recent update. Very recent pain there for us that we had to deal with. So how do we actually approach some of these things? Sorry, I'm just going back here. Let's think about the thinking here. So first off, I want to say this disclaimer. All models are wrong. Some models are useful, right? So I'm not saying here are a bunch of ultimate truths. Apply them liberally to everything. What I want you to think about is like different lenses that you can flick on and off when you're looking at a problem to be like, what do I see when I put this on versus what do I see if I put this on? And which one is useful for me now versus what's useful for me in a different situation? And first one I want to introduce you to, if you haven't seen it before, is the market curve. What's the market curve? This is something that's fairly old already. The newer kind of modification by Geoffrey Moore is the idea of the chasm. Whenever you're in a group of people and you want to introduce any kind of new way of thinking or change into that group of people, there will be roughly 12% of people that go, yeah, he knows what he's talking about. That sounds really interesting. And there's roughly 12.5% of people in this room that are going, oh, that guy's an idiot. What the hell is he talking about? That's fine. That's normal. That's humans' normal distribution of human opinions within any given space. The majority of people sit in the middle, and they're just like kind of open to it, but they haven't just decided. They're going to decide based on kind of like what they're seeing, the value that they're seeing in this thing that's being presented, and whether they can use it or not. Why this is really important is when this is a fractal pattern that applies to a game in its entirety, its life cycle, the market that you find yourself in, the update that you're working on, and it can even apply to ideas you're bringing into your team and how you want change to happen in your team. So a lot of organizational change, people bring new ideas. We're going to start doing Scrum or whatever you might have done in your studio. And 10% of people really loved it. It was great. So close. We got so close. Looked like it was going to work. Well, we just couldn't really get the rest of the studio into it. What happened? Well, that's what the chasm is. So most products fail in the chasm. They get the innovators, people that are interested in the idea because they want to know what they can do with it. And they get the early adopters, the people that are interested because they're interested in cool new things. And they just want to see what could happen here. But what they fail to do is jump the chasm over to the early majority. And the early majority only care if you solve a problem that they currently experience. That they can see the one-to-one relationship between what you're doing and what you're offering and the problem that they're experiencing. And what they're looking for is for the early adopters to show them where that lies. So many products, or many games fail by trying to appeal to the early majority and saying, oh, we can be all these cool things for you, but you're not that yet. And the early adopters are going to signal to them when you are that. And so a much better way of approaching these things is to focus on your early adopters and satisfy them and make sure that they're really happy with your game, that they're really bought into the cool future of what you can build. And when it becomes that, they will help you cross the chasm. And it's the same idea when you're dealing with change within a team. You focus on the people that you are helping. You try and make sure you create the best possible experience for them with the changes that you're bringing. And when you actually have solved enough of the problems that they are seeing the benefits and the value that they can advertise to the rest of the team, then that will propel you into being able to create the change for the rest of the team. If you're trying to force everybody into the change that you want, then you end up dying in the chasm. 10% of your team's really happy with it, and the others are really upset with you for making them change, right? Why I bring this up is because there's a really big inflection point right in the middle where you hit about halfway, and at this point, the nature of the game changes. It's no longer about what problem you solve. It's about everybody now solves this problem, and everybody has now kind of adopted this problem, and it's more about, in terms of market share, reducing the cost to compete. Because what happened when we started to show that horse racing was a really good idea, everyone jumped in, right? Everybody started making a horse lifestyle game. And as they were jumping in, they were solving the problem in various different ways. And we needed to try and stay up to date with that. We needed to try and cover things like show jumping and steeplechase and all these other things that other people were doing. But you get to the middle of that like kind of market curve where all the cool things have already been done. And it's becoming super expensive to add even more things in. And so your question isn't how do we solve this problem better than our competitors? It's actually how do we spend less money solving the problem so that we can sell it for cheaper, right? And that's what you see in like first-person shooters these days. How many people are reinventing how first-person shooters and consoles work? Or third-person shooters and consoles. First-person shooters and consoles are all horrible. That's my personal PC gamer opinion. Well, not many, right? Like a lot of people stick to a very proven formula. Why? Because if you get it wrong, your studio closes. You can't afford to get it wrong. You've got to stick with what people like and what they are going to be using. So that side switches its focus from effectiveness, which is what's the right thing to do, to efficiency, about how do we do this thing right. And those two things are opposites. You can't do both. Being efficient is necessarily less effective, and being more effective is necessarily less efficient. Why? Well, think about it this way, right? You're trying to make a new game idea, like be innovative in your mechanics. How do you prove that a new mechanic is going to be fun? Well, you need to build a bunch of different ones that are not fun, and then test it on people until someone says, yeah, this is really cool. And then you can build from there. You can scale it up to make something even, bigger and better from it. But if you're trying to be really efficient, so you don't want to build anything unnecessary. So no extra prototypes. Only one prototype, and we need to plan the hell out of that prototype to make sure the first swing is right. It's not going to work, right? Like you need to be wrong in order to figure out what's right. Whereas if you already know what first-person shooter mechanics look like, and all you're trying to do is to deliver that as well as you possibly can, you can cut a lot of the excess off and really focus down on the core mechanics and trim it down to create Counter-Strike 2 instead of Counter-Strike Global Offensive, which is the exact same game with the exact same mechanics with slightly new set dressing. I'm a Counter-Strike fan, so that's why I raised that particular one. I have some other fans in the audience as well. So in horse racing, we actually got to the point where we were kind of here in the middle, right? We were still building new things, but we also had a lot of things that needed to be more efficient. And how do you manage this in a team where some people are trying to do something cool and creative, and other people are just trying to keep the damn thing running? Good question. Let's talk about it later. Well, another thing, I talked a little bit about the communication complexity. So this is called Brooks' Law, Dunbar's number. There's lots of interesting articles about this. It's early ideas around like how people connect to each other and how many meaningful relationships can you have with someone. And in a team, that really matters because The larger the number of people, the less likely you are able to create psychological safety where people can disagree. If people can't disagree, effective game development becomes harder because I have to be wrong in order to be able to find what's right. And if I don't feel comfortable being wrong, then I'm going to try the thing that I could be wrong about, and that could lead me down a path where I make what's already known rather than actually try push the boundaries and come up with something cool and new. At the same time, it's not very efficient to argue about every pixel when we're developing an asset pipeline full of rocks. How much extra creative value are we going to get out of debating what a rock should look like if all we need is 1 million rocks because we want to put a bunch of assets into an environment? There might be an art Bible that dictates what rocks should look like and what okay and good looks like, and then you can just have a whole bunch of people do it. You don't necessarily need a highly dynamic team to figure that out. And that's where I want to introduce these two ideas, work groups and teams. So a team, think of that as like one side of like the sports metaphor, which is the easiest way to really understand a team. Right? If the All Blacks have the scrum half scoring the try, or the fullback scoring the try, or the prop scoring the try, does it matter? No, because either you scored more tries than the other guys, or you didn't. Anybody can score a try, and if the scrum half wins, everyone wins. If the fullback wins, everyone wins. Right? There is no such thing as I am happy with my performance even though the team lost. It's a shared goal that we're all working towards, and our shared experience and capability is what's going to lead to us either accomplishing the goal or not accomplishing the goal. A work group, on the other hand, is the opposite of that. We might be working towards the same thing, but at the end of the day, I have a metric by which I can succeed. That doesn't necessarily mean you succeed, right? So I've seen this in development teams before where, someone might say, well, the design was fantastic, it was really high standard, or the code was bug-free, or the art looked amazing. And the product manager or the product person says, yeah, but we made no money. And everyone goes, oh yeah, but I did my part. That's not what you want in a new game development kind of scenario, right? Like you want people to be more on the team side. But that doesn't mean that you need everybody to be part of a team in order to make a game succeed. You need some people to be in a team, and you need other people to produce assets for those people to be able to use to make the cool thing that they want to make. So how can we separate these ideas out in such a way that they're useful, that we can have the output of the one, which is way more than what that one can achieve, and yet have the creativity of the other one? And that's one of the questions that we needed to answer for ourselves as well. So effectiveness is on the team side. Teams are more effective because they can debate and be creative and create psychological safety to wrestle through things. And work groups are more efficient. They can deliver more things that are known. So what's the right thing to do is this one. How do we do more of the right thing is that one, right? But no team is one or the other. They're always kind of like a spectrum here. I've never actually worked on any team that I could say squarely fits in this bracket or in that bracket. I've been doing this for like 20 years, right? I'm sure all of you can think of where you lie on that with your current team or another team, and that's all right. You don't have to be. Like I said at the beginning, false dichotomies are a bad thing. You never are black and white in any of these things. But they come with drawbacks if you're not clear on which one you are and what you're trying to achieve. Now let's talk about predictability, because that's really important when we're talking effectiveness and efficiency. So predictability is about, like, I'm going to just do a little bit of a thought experiment, because this is going to be a little bit, meaty. See if we can get through it. I want you to think about the golf ball each time and how predictable it is where the golf ball will land, right? So in this scenario, golf ball is not going anywhere because the kid can't hit the ball. That's fine. But we'll get more complex as we go. What about this situation? So I'm dropping a golf ball. It's going straight down. It's going to hit the sand. How accurate do you feel you could predict where that golf ball will land? Fairly accurately. Sand's not going to let it roll around very much. It's going to go boop, down, right? So in this kind of situation where it's pretty clean cut, there's cause and effect, predictable variables, not a lot of things to consider, we can have a base practice that says, do it this way. Yes, we know there are other ways you could do it. Yes, sure, you could try and do a complicated physics analysis of how deep it will penetrate the sand, but we don't care. Don't do it. Just leave it out. It's good enough for us to just say it's going to hit the sand there. What about in this scenario? How accurately could you predict where that ball will end up? What would you need to be able to predict where that ball will end up? Well, what you'll need is an expert, someone who does know the physics, because there's way more variables to worry about, right? Now, other things you need to be worried about is this in a game engine where you effectively have a vacuum and don't have to worry about friction in air and all that kind of stuff? Or is this in like a real world scenario and you actually do have to worry about air pressure and all these other things? Well, in that case, you need an expert that knows all of that physics to be able to pick the right equation for the situation you're in to be able to figure out where it's going to be. Now, I'm not a physics expert, so I'm going to go to Andrew and say, hey, Andrew, what should I use to predict this? And Andrew will say, well, I don't know, but I'll go do some research. And then he'll come back to me with some options, and we can then discuss which one's the best one for us to use in our particular game. And then we'll do that. Maybe he'll, knowing Andrew, probably say, don't use physics at all, just use a bespoke system, but that's fine. That's also an expert call. How about this fella? Now, I haven't followed golf in a very, very long time. I understand that this is currently the world #1 golf player. His name is Scotty Shelfer. How accurately would you be able to predict where his ball will land? And what would you need to be able to do that accurately? Statistics and science, right? We couldn't predictably say where it's going to end up with 100% certainty, but we could get a 95% significance on it, perhaps, where we have enough data to be able to calculate where it should be. And we do that through scientific process by having fail cases that if we are predicting it incorrectly, we would know that we did it wrong. And we want predictive correlation, we can't necessarily guarantee that we could get causation here. Predictive correlation means that I can say up front, I think it will end up roughly 200 meters away, 2 degrees off to the left, and 95% of the time I'm right? So there's a 5% chance I'm wrong. Just because I haven't seen it happen doesn't mean it won't happen. And there's probably a range within that's going to be true. So the other part that I can't account for is whether Scotty had a good night's sleep. I can also not account for whether he had a falling out with his partner about his choice of entertainment on tour, etc. And how that might affect his performance on the day I'm measuring it. Right? So there's all these other variables when you're coming to this level of complexity that you need to account for that you can't be 100% sure you're going to get the same result every time. What about this scenario? So this little boy is going to hit the ball. You know about as much as I do here. There's a boy, he's got a golf stick, club. There's a ball, he's going to hit it. How accurately do you think you could predict where it would go? Probably not very accurately, because the first boy didn't even hit the ball. And this one, apparently is really good at it. Well, we couldn't have known that until we asked him to hit the ball. So this is where there's so little information for us to go on that we actually need to generate more information before we can even think about an experiment to run. We can spin our wheels for ages trying to think about how to analyze the boy's stance and the club he's using and the ball he's using. But in the end, just getting him to take a swipe is probably a best way to start, right? And then from there, we can start to be statistical about it. Maybe over time, we can even figure out some kind of pattern because he's predictable enough and he's in such a controlled environment that there could be an equation that we could use to predict where the ball will land. And eventually, perhaps it's so simple that we don't even have to worry about it because it's already GIFed and it will land literally in the same spot every time because it is a GIF and a GIF will never change. Best practice is to just let the GIF play and we'll see where it ends, right? All right, so I've just introduced this to you. This is called Cynefin. It's created by a guy called Dave Snowden. It is a framework for analyzing your decision-making in terms of predictability of the situation you find yourself in. It's a topographical map because what it's trying to illustrate is that if you think something is as simple as dropping the ball in the sand and you build an automated system to handle it for you, and it wasn't, then you fall into chaos because it's going to drop off this cliff where everyone expected it to just work and it didn't. Build services can sometimes work like this, right? Like you have a build machine, it builds your game for you on a predictable level. Suddenly something changes in the automated system that makes it fail, and everybody is going, why the hell are the build servers not working? And then some expert needs to go intervene and fix them. Cool. This happens, that's cool. We treat it like it's clear. It's not always clear, things change, but it's clear enough for practical purposes most of the time. And that's kind of like how you want to think of each of these. They don't define necessarily the exact right way to do anything. And every situation is a nuanced range of decisions that each one of them falls somewhere on this. Some of them are more complex, some of them you know a lot about, some of them you know very little about. But the core fundamentals of it is that you're trying to say, all right, how predictable is the decision I'm about to make? What is the most appropriate way for me to make that decision? Should this be an experiment where I design fail cases up front, run the experiment, and see whether it worked out or not, following the scientific method? Or is this a case where I just need to walk up to an expert and say, hey, expert, tell me what are my options for dealing with this problem? Or is this a simple, well, you should follow a best practice. Here's a recipe. Make my Benedictine eggs the same way every time, full stop. I don't want creative gourmet version of it. I just want standard poached eggs. I don't know if that's what Eggs Benedict is. I think it is. Anyway, this is what it looks like from a top-down view. This is called Kinevin dynamics. And what I wanted to introduce here is the idea that Scrum is a good way of taking complex ideas, things that are most appropriately explored during using the scientific principle, and moving it into the complicated space, where an expert can form concrete governing constraints for how to deal with a situation in a predictable way. It is terribly suited for making things more predictable over time and efficiently delivering them. It's not what Scrum is meant to do. Scrum is a group of people with different skills swarming around a problem that are fairly equal in their power and fairly equal in their seniority to be able to have interesting, deep conversations about how to solve a problem, run experiments, and figure it out. Great for certain types of game development. Awful for asset production. Way too much overhead. We have way too many meetings. We have way too many opinions being raised over something that doesn't need any. What's better for this is something like Kanban or Lean, where we can just say, well, we want this many of this thing. Here's a specification for what we want. Take from the top, make as many as you can in the shortest period of time as you can, make sure they live up to this standard. And over time, we're constantly trying to figure out how we can do that more optimally. How can we eliminate more waste from how we're doing it and do it faster and crisper? Now, we talked about teams and work groups at the beginning, and you can see how these are very different ways of thinking about the work. And you have people that are better suited for different parts of this, and some people are very good at adapting to both these different types of work. And some people are really ill-suited and potentially could get really frustrated having to do one over the other. So understanding who you've got, what kind of problem you're trying to solve, and where to position people is part of the equation that we need to handle here as well. I introduced you to all of this stuff because this bottom line here, clear, complicated, complex, and chaos, is about understanding the nature of the decision complexity that you're dealing with. And this one over here is your team's ability to work together, understand the market, make sense of the kinds of decisions that they need to make, and then appropriately forming around those or adjusting to address them. And this here is a spectrum of how directive you are, how much you tell people what to do, versus how egalitarian you are with the decisions, how open you are to debate and conversation. So there's your golf balls at the bottom, roughly. When we're dealing with a very straightforward recipe scenario, we don't need to have a big open discussion that everybody gets to have their say in, where everybody agrees that we should follow a recipe. It's a very inefficient way of making a decision in that particular case. What we need is someone to decisively say, this is how we're doing it, let's move on. This isn't worth us having a large conversation about. Let's just do it. In Pickpock, that would be if someone was to say, let's use a different game engine. No, the studio will just say, nope, we're not doing that. We could look at it in the future, but right now, that's not an option. You use Unity, full stop, move on. Right? Now, there's a lot of complexity that comes after selecting Unity, but the choice of making Unity as your game engine start is pretty simple. The second part here, the complicated space, you can see that the commander, which is your most highly directive stance, very involved, don't get me wrong, this is done well, not done poorly. We're assuming that by being a commander in this space, you are winning the trust of your team, you are present where the work is happening, you are expert enough in the subject matter to be able to make these calls, and that you are helping your team to evolve and their own understanding of the situation that enables them to be less dependent on you in the future. If we're in a really simple scenario, other than games, let's not think just about games here, you may really just need this. You may not need to ever step out of this. But it's really poorly suited for being able to handle complex scenarios like finding the fun. There you need something a little bit more in the complex space. And in between, you've got the complicated space. How will the physics engine in our game work? Are we going to use Unity's default system, or are we going to build our own version of that? Well, your leader probably doesn't have that answer. They need technical experts to help them come up with a solution. They need designers to go and figure out what they want the system to do for us to be able to define the space that will allow us to answer that question. So the connector, which is the middle space, they're asking for knowledge to base their decisions on. And they're asking experts to generate the options so that they can pick. Because they go, well, I don't know. What are my options? And then the tech lead will say, well, you could do this, or you could do this, or you could do that. And they say, what's the downside if I do this? What about that one? Let's do this one. This sounds like a really good one. And based on that, we can move forward. Facilitator level is where you become a peer, part of the team. So you are one of them. You don't hold the authority to make the decision anymore. You are all collectively figuring out how to respond appropriately. This is much more suited for dynamic, complex environments where we don't know what the right thing is to do yet. We can't ask an expert to tell us how to do the thing because the expert doesn't know. And if you ask them, they probably would think they know because they're applying their expertise. And the thing with experts is they assume that the solution lies within their expertise. So if I go to a engineer and I ask them for a solution, they're going to give me an engineering solution. If I go to a social scientist, they're going to tell me that it's all about how people are talking about to each other or some fallacy that we're committing. If I go to a psychologist, they'll say that it's probably about the safety and safe psychology of the team, etc. Whoever you go to, whichever specialist you go to, they will start from what they know. And when you're in a complex scenario, this is detrimental. Because in a complex scenario, you first want to suspend your belief about what you think the problem is and just understand the environment, design the experiments, try things out, and as evidence comes to the fore, you can then start classifying it and get the right expert. And chaos, well, either someone needs to make a directive decision and get things done, or you hope that your team is capable of handling pretty much anything thrown at them because chaos is chaos. And chaos means that we just need to do something, try it, and see what happens. What we don't want to do is sit in a room and debate it for ages. Even in the middle, when we're talking about facilitator and mirror, I cannot bore you with the details of the mirror right now. That's basically somewhere between. It's not something that you're probably going to use in your game development teams very often. That isn't somewhere we want to sit in a room and debate for ages either. We want to enter a space where we can be exploratory, where we seek possibility space and agree on our options, and then move forward. We want to bias towards action. What we don't want is for us to all say, well, everyone in the room has to agree before we leave this room. Because if I did that in this room right here, right now, we would be here for the entire conference and everyone would walk out unhappy by the end, right? Because that's the nature of people. People cannot all agree on an idea. What we do need to do is to make sure that the group is capable of selecting who's the most appropriate person to make the decision and give that person the knowledge they need, and then move on, move forward. Don't get paralyzed. Do it for the right things and just as long as you need. All right, so this is kind of roughly what it looks like. Like I said, there's a lot of information here. It's a lot to explain in a very short space of time, so I'm not really going to try. The commander is defined by the idea that you're the single person in charge, and you are in charge, responsible and accountable for how things get done and how well they get done. That means you have to be there all the time, and you're essentially managing all the communication. This is a really, really tough job to do. It's probably the hardest job to do, especially if you're working with a big team. Very few game development teams should be there, honestly. If you're there, it should be for a short period of time, for one decision in a while, and it really should be extreme circumstances where you have to reach into that space. The connector, the idea is that you are giving up the directing being how we do the thing. You retain the demanding, like saying that should be done at least this well. And you're taking on a new behavior, which is to connect people and get them to go away, talk about it, come up with options, and bring it back. The facilitator is dropping the demanding. So notice in the Scrum Guide, it says that the team come up with a sprint goal at the end of sprint planning. Not the product manager or product owner decides what the goal is and the team figures out how to do it. Why is that? Well, because the team have the capability of being able to create the demand for themselves. They no longer need the leader to dictate to them what good enough looks like. They can figure it out themselves. So each one of these stages requires a capability to be grown in the team to be able to do that. So commander to connector, we're talking about them being able to resolve conflict amongst themselves, because what were we giving up? Managing the conversation between them. They're going to have to talk amongst each other. If they're going to disagree about some stuff and not be able to figure it out, they're going to get stuck. All right, cool, they can do that. Now we want to go up to the facilitator level. Well, in this case, they need to be able to figure out how to make decisions. To be able to make a decision, you have to be able to decide what good enough looks like. In order to be able to do that, well, we need to be able to assess the situation, determine what our approaches are and what good looks like for the approach, and then select the appropriate one, right? This is the first point at which Scrum works. Before this point, if your team doesn't have these capabilities, Scrum probably isn't going to work for you. In fact, it might even be a detriment to your system, or at best, it's just a slightly different looking project management tool. Right? It doesn't actually do what Scrum says on the box it's supposed to do. Beyond this point, Scrum can work. You can actually get the value out of it. From facilitator to mirror, the difference is the facilitator is giving up the connecting part of getting people to talk to each other. They step out of the group and they let the group figure that out for themselves. And instead, they focus on feedback, making sure that the people are following the vision, staying within the bounds of the vision, helping them reflect on how the vision connects with the ideas that are on the table. And then the visionary is where they even give up the feedback element because they've taught the team how to give feedback, and they just step purely into the space where they catalyze new ideas and they kick off thoughts and people kind of run with themselves. That top level is usually an executive team. Very rarely will you see that on a game team level. I think Supercell may have been able to pull that off. Very few other companies have. The mirror, that's like what your general manager would probably be doing. Like, you know, most of the time the CEO doesn't actually work with the team very closely and tell them what to do. They're probably showing up once in a sprint review, giving them feedback to help them refine the thoughts. Facilitator, Scrum Master, Product Owner style, Scrum. Connector, well, this is usually what project management producers look like, right? They are at that very base level, working with the team, figuring out how to get the job done. And commander, call center operator, effectively. Follow the script, don't deviate from the script. I give them a bad kind of view there, but there are sometimes where a game team leader, like a product owner or a game director, needs to step into a commander role to say, hey guys, we're overthinking this, just do this. This is not that complicated, let's just move forward. Okay, we're getting too caught up in the weeds here. And then they let go again, if the team is capable of it. But if your team isn't capable of it, you're better off acting like that until they are than pretending they're more capable than they aren't, right? In terms of being able to resolve the conflict amongst themselves. So if there's conflict, you reach in, there's no conflict, you can step back. Preferably, teach them how to resolve the conflict, otherwise it might just be hidden conflict. All right, there are the skills on the side that I was talking about. So directive demanding, demanding conducting, conducting coaching, coaching envisioning, envisioning, and catalyzing. So those are the behaviors that the leader would be exhibiting. Each time the team is taking over that behavior when the leader moves from one stage to another. And there's nothing wrong with a leader moving in both directions. It's fine. If the situation calls for it, it's fine. You want to learn more about it? I've written some blogs about it. You can read more. This is based on a bunch of research. I highly recommend, if you haven't looked at it before, Organic Agility, which really established a lot of these core ideas. All right, so what were the results? What did we actually do with all this theory I just bombarded you with? Hopefully you can take a breath. Okay, the theory's over. It's not going to hit me with any more of it. Sorry about that. I know it's a bit deep. If your eyes are glazing over, you can ask me some questions in a few minutes. All right, situational frame. So the company instituted something called the situational frame, where they created a clear frame for what the team should be working towards. This includes the strategy that is going to essentially help them make sense of the market that they're in, right? So for us, it was be the best horse racing game on the market, grow players' trust in the brand, and focus on stable revenue. Why? This is a pillar of the studio's success. It must remain steady, right? People have to be happy with it. They need to continue to support us to be able to make more games and run the studio. And if we don't make sure that we continue to be the best horse racing game in the market, people will go elsewhere. And we don't want that. We want to keep them. We like our players. All right, cool. So this leadership structure that was put in place is connector, more of a producer style structure. And commander if must. Not if we don't have to, otherwise connector, right? So we're not going full Scrum here. Why? Late game product. We don't necessarily need to have full effectiveness. We need more efficiency. We also instituted the ideas of lean. So I talked earlier about how lean is better at efficiency. And one of the key concepts behind that is the 5 whys. So 5 whys is the idea of whenever something goes right or wrong, instead of having a retrospective at the end of every sprint, we just go, okay, something has just happened. Let's gather around the work space where it happened, good or bad, not just bad. And we say, all right, what's the systemic thing behind this? And we're not just saying, it was Jim's fault. Jim did this. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is, all right, Jim says he made a mistake. Cool. What was behind that? Jim was tired. Why was Jim tired? Jim was tired because we've been dealing with 11 live issues this week, and he was literally up in the middle of the night trying to figure out how to solve a problem and didn't sleep properly, and the next morning he made another mistake because he was tired. Why are we facing so many live issues at the moment? Well, because every time that we do address a live issue, we're putting the entire team on it, which means that the developers who are trying to build the next feature are actually losing time and focus and making mistakes on the work they're making there because they're tired and split focus and blah, blah, blah. All right, cool. Why are we doing that? Well, because we don't have clear definitions about who should and shouldn't be working on something. We're not splitting the focus of the team away so that they can just be on what they are. And so what we did is we created an ops team. Here we go. Whose job it is to run the game. Every release that goes out, that's their responsibility. Every live issue that happens, that's their responsibility. Live events that happen, that's their responsibility. If something touches the users directly, they make sure that it goes well, and if it doesn't, they're the ones that sort it out. We also created a dev team, and the dev team's job is to build cool new shit. The cool new features that are going to make this more operatable is coming from this group of people. This group of people are all about efficiency, lean. This group of people are all about effectiveness, Scrum. And so they work completely differently, and they don't just jump across, oh, these guys have a crisis, we're going to take these people over here. Nope. I stand up in the middle and say, nope, make a good argument. Oh, you don't want to make a good argument? Cool. Go sit down then. There's always a good reason, right? And someone needs to be the hard bastion in the middle that makes sure that that doesn't get frivolously crossed. There are certain situations where we have crossed that barrier, where I just say, well, okay, I'm melting into the background. It's not a good time for me to be a barrier here because things were that serious and needed that level of intervention. But whenever I can, I create a hard barrier here. Because if I don't, we go back into the space where these guys are overwhelmed with too many things to do to ensure that everything is taken care of in the right way. And these guys end up having to pay the price for it too. We also took our content team and split them out entirely. Took them off the team even, off the product. They are now a separate entity of their own. They get a list of assets to produce. They disagree about the order in which those will be done, and they do them. And you cannot ask them to go and invent you a cool new thing that you're going to be putting into your game, because that's not what they do. But they do have an end-to-end pipeline from, oops, did I just press the wrong button there? This thing is flashing at me. Oh, yeah? Oh, am I over time? Cool. Thank you. Appreciate that. I didn't see the warning. That's all good. All right, this was our branching at the end. You can see that it got way down to the minimum. It was much, much simpler, much easier to merge. We split out these pipes. Each one of them delivers to the client separately. The server and the payloads ended up being together. We have had a period of no more than 3 live issues at a time. It's very hard to get to 0, but we are trending towards it. We got 1 in the last release. Our conflict still happens. You must have conflict, but it's healthy. We talk about it. We work through it. We figure out how to deal with stuff, and no leaders have burnt out since we've made this change. So, what's next? We have more things to worry about. We will deal with that. I can't explain it to you, unfortunately. Maybe next time. Any questions? Probably no time for that either. Are we done? Next class starts in 2 minutes. All right, cool. So there we go. Feel free to ask me questions outside. That's fine.